recording. Welcome back to part two. This is really exciting. I'm Clanmother Karenann MacDonald, and I have an esteemed bunch of friends here. We're into part two of what savage sovereignty is, clan mothers, headsmen, the great dragons, whatever we want to call it, but how to get back into our original laws of peace and how all of us as peoples has to come back into that great council and the great law of peace. So with me is Chief Miko, if you could introduce yourself briefly and how to get a hold of you.
Mikohehewuti. Good afternoon. My name is Miko. I am clan mother of a hereditary Choctaw tribe, or if you want to call us a clan, because that's the correct term here in the United States. You can get a hold of me at mikohehewuti at choctawturtletribe.org, and I will pass that information on to Clan Mother Karen here so she can add it to the descriptions. And I yield back.
Spasibo. Thank you. Eagle.eye.man, can you introduce yourself, please?
Hi, yes, I'm Mikohehewuti, eagle-eye-man in the original tongue, and I hold the knowledge of an international legal advisor because I learned from one. So I would be what's known as a de facto international legal advisor. And I say de facto because it means exists in fact, not necessarily lawful, but that's a different topic. Looking at the meanings of words, just research de facto and de jure.
Yes, that's quite true. Anyway, so I wanted to welcome you guys all here, Spasibo Vitulo in our language. And so one of the things we talked about in part one briefly was what is the definitions of a savage versus private person, public person, inhabitant, where, you know, these prisoner of wars and basically concentration camps fall into, which is a band and reserve. And we showed, quite frankly, some of the original treaties that are only authorized by clan mothers. So you're going to see that none of these little business contracts that they've been trying to shuffle lands and cities and entire areas into never belonged to these people in the first place. They never had a loyal title or signatory authority to take or break one of those things, which we basically shut down the 408 AD treaty back in there. So one of the things that Tim wanted to talk a little bit, and Miko myself, was to elaborate in part two is what is the great law of peace? Also, how important the language actually is. As Tim, you know, so eloquently put, is that you have to have original customs, usages, and laws. And you can't go into the church and the Bible and then use that as your background and say that you're a signatory. That doesn't work. In other words, you can't go to church on Sunday and belong to all these 5,000 religions and the whole thing of revoca and everything else, and then say that you actually have some signatory authority, because that doesn't cut it here. And also in clan mother lineage, it's passed down from the oldest female to the oldest female to the oldest female. So there is a genetic inheritance. That's why it's called inheritance, hereditary. It's called the mitochondrial DNA. And those original tribes, again, we can actually trace our blood lineage. So I would be AB positive. So there's a difference between those lineages and the blood types. And that's the whole thing, why people can't make claims. So Tim, I'm going to turn it over to you a little bit. You wanted to really expound upon the language, the whole linguistics, the ideology of the words, getting into what the problem is with English and stuff like that. So I'll turn it over to you.
Yes. Before I start that, I would just like to clarify. According to America, it was time to pick a new head clan mother. The whole clan would get together, and the whole clan, by 100% consensus, would have to agree as to who the new head clan mother was. And in them doing that, that is what gives her the power of the sovereign, power of life and death over the members of her clan, because they gave it to her. And that is really the sovereign power defined. That's why she is the sovereign. She is the law. Her word is law, right? Because it was agreed to by the whole clan, 100%. And it's not just firstborn to firstborn. Meredith said it to be traditional eligible for the head clan mother position. It was the firstborn or last born daughter of a firstborn. So it wasn't just the firstborn of a firstborn. It could be the last born of a firstborn as well.
Right. If you didn't have that one had passed on or something, if there was a demise, but as a rule, yeah, that would be the next thing. I'm just putting up here quickly as we talk a little bit about English and the crap of it. When people say, where do you have this in paper? I said, it's right in front of your face. I'm sorry you can't decode the hieroglyphics of the tribes. But Tim, could you elaborate a little bit about the etymology and stuff like that of the language, please?
Well, yes, as I was discussing before with Chief Miko, the language, there's two languages, English language we speak on the street and legalese as it's known, right? The language in law in a courtroom. They both sound like English, but they're two totally different languages. What you think a judge asked you a question, you think you understand what he's asking you because it sounds like English, but he's not. He's asking you to the letter of the law, to the exact legal meaning of a term, right? And that word term is, in most cases, not what you think it is. It's usually exact opposite. So just to be aware that there are two languages, but they both sound like English. The language of the law, the Romans' law, the white man's law in a court, judges, etc., lawyers, sounds like English, but it's not at all, okay? You have to read a law dictionary and then you'll see the difference between the words from what you thought it meant and what it actually means in law. And about the language itself, English, as Meredith says, and it's so true, the English is a singular thought concept language. It's reasoned in the compartmentive and spoken in duality. White man speaks with forked tongue. So what that means is singular thought concept can only hold one thought in its mind at a time. It's reasoned in the compartmentive, which is an example like you have church and then you have government, church, each in their own box, each in their own compartment, right? Everything's in their thinking is in that manner. Everything's in its own compartment. And spoken in duality speaks for itself. So English being a singular thought concept, the original tribal languages, the original languages of the tribes, of the people, are a multiple thought concept language. So multiple thought far superior to a single thought concept language. And which is, as Meredith says, is why the Indian always knew when the white man was lying to him. Because if you're speaking a multiple thought concept language, it forces you to think in multiple thought concepts. So when the white man was talking to them and he said something that's not true, so you've got two singular thought concept speaking in duality, well, the Indians operating on a multiple thought concept, like 4 different levels at once. So they always knew when they were lying to them. So that was all like what I wanted to bring up initially, just about the whole concept of the English language, as opposed to an original tribal language being multiple thought concept. Far superior language, and which is really one of the main focuses that all the tribal peoples should be doing, actually, is getting that language back to the youth and their people, their original language, to its highest degree. If they could get it back to what it was when the white man first arrived, it would be absolutely awesome.
Now, one of the really interesting things I remember being passed down information, critical information by my Baba and Gita's, right, on that particular thing, because he was part of the military. And that was something that I, also was blessed to be, was with a lot of the vets, Canadian vets and international forces vets that recognize these original treaties. And so do a lot of the international different people within those forces, and also Homeland Security and many other forces too, and gatekeepers and stuff like that. Now, one of the interesting things, and this is, just to keep it on the YouTube friendly, but there's a lot of people that took injections and things along this line, and they've mutated that incredible creator divine blueprint, which we call our DNA. And one of the things that we know that the Supreme Courts have said that if you have taken anything that is altering that, in other words, an mRNA injection or anything along that line, that you are no longer deemed even to be a hereditary. You will now be deemed as basically a homo cyborg genesis. And that
Well,
becomes
legally, they termed it, you're no longer human, you're now a transhuman, which
right,
is why the
Can
United
you
Nations a little while back created the category of a transhuman.
right.
Can you link that in the description for everyone to see and read? Because what I find is when they can't put the facts in front of their face, it's really hard for them to remember that. And I think what you just said is very crucial. It is something that my mother and her mother and everyone else beat into me as a child. Don't accept an injection, don't take vaccines, do not get a blood transfusion, because of what you just said. It's always been known knowledge through our people, but it seems like as time goes on, that's being wiped from the severity of what that means. It doesn't seem like it's so damaging, but it is. And you're right on.
And so a lot of people that, when they come up and they say, well, we have this right and we have that right. And then I question them and that they don't know their own blood type or how to do the tracing of the genetics, because of I don't even say intermarriage, but we've had everything from cloning to hybridization. And this is part of the watering down of the different tribes as well. And a lot of people are not aware of this, but I have to bring this up that this is very important. You can't just say that you are this or you're Métis or that you're sovereign or whatever. Again, it has to be provable. We know that the hybridization programs and through a lot of the nefarious operations that have been going on are in here. And one of the things I'll just bring up, I have spoken with the previous international war crimes judge and former lawyer, Alfred Weber, who holds an international Washington, D.C. inactive bar, but has been on many different councils through the thing, is that I spoke very much about this when you talked about the Homo Borg Genesis. This is actually in the courts. So this is not something that's made up, and you can take a look at some of these things. And this goes back 4, 5, 6 years ago, we've known about this. So if people have a problem with it, there is an actual legal determination made by the Supreme Court at this point. So I think
Thank
that's really important.
Yes, thank you. Thank you.
So one of the things, Tim, if you could elaborate, I think, which is really important on here is some of the things that there were many different PDFs that were passed down. And I know I have about a 1,400 page. I've been now organized into about 6 different binders now. But these were different papers that have been passed down at least through orally and then translated through someone called Meredith Quinn. And a lot of that stuff, I believe it was Lester House that went down in the early mid 90s. Could you talk a little bit about how you came to this knowledge and what was the pivotal aha moment for you? And I know I have been out, I traveled out of Saskatoon out to the areas there by some of the Bear Clan and some of the areas where some of the original tribes were. Can you talk a little bit about that? How you came to this valuable knowledge and how it could be applied to this day, please. And if you could put your camera on to Soft again. Thanks.
I Well, I first became aware, as it was known, a signatory Indian, and I'm trying to think of around the year 2004, I think, 2005, 2004, by a man named Lester House, who came to Duck Bay to do a presentation on signatory Indian, right? Sovereignty and international law. Lester is a man that had gone to meet Meredith Quinn back in 1994, and there was a video taken of the meeting that they had. It was in Meredith's home. And I got to watch that movie, and there's so much knowledge that Meredith talks about history, the law, like such a wealth of information. That guy was an incredibly intelligent, savage, and very, very, very knowledgeable man in a very wide range of subjects. Like he was science, magnetism, electric, like such a vast breadth of knowledge he had. So I learned from his writings, because he passed in 2004, I believe it was, 10 years after that meeting. So Lester had met him, had this conversation. Then some of the boys from up northern Manitoba went down to see his widow and brought back a big box of a lot of his writings, all of his work, because he produced a lot of books and pamphlets, different things over the years, right? Like you were saying, a big stack of papers, actually, if you print them all out, it's about 2.5, 3 foot wide. Yeah, that's a picture of the meeting when it took place. So they went down, brought those back, and then started taking them around the reserves and getting copies printed off at different reservations, etc. And I was gifted a copy of the Meredith's works, and I devoured them. But you were saying, like, what got me going was, well, Lester came to Duck Bay, and he was there for the weekend, so it was like Friday, Saturday, Sunday. So he started Friday afternoon, and the very way he opened up his presentation and started talking was, under international law, there are three classes of beings. One, savage; two, person; three, inhabitant. And he had that on the paper on a whiteboard. You stand up kind of thing, just lift up the paper, neck new sheet. But he wrote that down. That was the first three words: savage, person, inhabitant. And he explained, like, savage is a savage, first law of the land. Inhabitant, person is your Roman rule of law, the private person being royalty, and an inhabitant being a third world citizen. A savage is someone that believes in and has a head clan mother as their sovereign. An inhabitant does not have that. And that's what makes them a third world citizen. So basically that was his intro, and I just understood it as he said it. It just, okay, yeah, I get that. And that was an epiphany, because to me, it showed that there was a creator, because you can express it in a way that white man listens and honors the law. If you're a savage, the RCMP in Canada don't touch you. They don't bother you. Like, I got friends that are chiefs that travel around on the highway, no license, no insurance, no registration. They get pulled over by the cops. They tell the cops what they want the cops to do, and the cops do it and go on about their merry way. So when I talk about this stuff, it's none of it's make believe. It's been proven by, I witnessed. I mean, I've experienced it myself as well. The instance, the time I got pulled over, I was told I was driving with no license, no insurance, no registration, and the cop told me he was going to tow my car. He put me in the back of the cop car, started asking me questions. What's my name? Eagle.eye.man. No, what's your real name? I told you, Eagle.eye.man. You're hard of hearing. Okay. And the thing to bear in mind is he knew what my civilized name was.
Mm-hmm.
But he was following proper protocol. He was abiding by Elk versus Wilkins.
Right.
Because a cop has no jurisdiction over you as a savage unless you give it to him by the language that you use, the terms or the things that you say. So he got me in, he asked me what my name was. Well, truth of the matter is, I don't have a name, I have a calling. Because only things have names. Nobody has a name if they're breathing, because they're a living being. Person, place, or thing has a name. Put me in the back of the cop car, asked me my name, Eagle.eye.man. Then he looks at his partner and he goes, well, where do you live? And I told him, on the territory of the Shishipsipiwakwet, and Nishinabek, the Duck River Bay Indians. And he goes, no, where do you really live? And that's how he said it, right? It was like comical. And I told him again, same thing. He says, no, I mean Dauphin, Winnipegosis, Camperville, Pine Creek, Duck Bay, names off all the little towns and villages around.
Mm-hmm.
I just looked at him and said, those places that you are talking of are on the territory of the Shishipsipiwakwet Nishinabek. So he just looks at his partner who's sitting in behind the driver's seat, in the driver's seat. He looks at him and says, follow me. And he gets out of the cop car and he goes over to my car where I pulled over on the side of the road. He gets in, fires it up, and takes my car to where I was going in the first place.
Mm-hmm.
And what I was actually doing was moving furniture for Mum. She was moving a house off the Pine Creek Reserve to a little house on the other side of Camberville.
Right.
So he gets in, starts driving my car, and he takes it to where I was going.
Mm-hmm.
So his buddy fire, is looking, you see him, he's following along behind him, and he's looking in the rearview mirror, and he's sort of like, what the hell's going on here, right? Because he didn't know about the law. His partner had been briefed because we'd done paperwork. And that's why he's saying he was following proper protocol. to
Right.
try and get jurisdiction. If I'd have said, oh, I live in Camperville or whatever without qualifying, that would have put me into his jurisdiction and he could have charged me and towed my car. So remember at the beginning, he said, I'm going to charge you with these three things and tow your car. Well, he just got into my car, he drove it home for me, and I haven't been charged with anything. And he's not towed my car, he just drove it home for me.
I think
And
that's
as
kind
he's
of
given
funny.
me, it
I
is, I thought,
Yeah, a lot of us have had similar experience. I've only had one negative experience actually in 20 some years, as you're aware of too. I was doing my own. Chief Miko, do you want to add anything into here? And then we'll maybe look at another aspect of sovereignty.
I'm loving the fact that he's given these details. I would like to see though if there is a way whenever we're talking about what they're supposed to say. That language is really hard because again, in the first part we discussed sovereign citizenship movements and how that can cross over. So it's really fine line. And when he's talking, it's confusing, but I know what he's talking about. So when he's saying you have to be careful of what way, if you're in the US soil, what would you tell the police officer when he pulled you over?
well, I would say exactly the same thing. Actually, I'm on the territory of my tribe, which, whatever tribe it is, because you're identifying in a manner that doesn't give him jurisdiction. The way I look at it, and to me, it's like sort of clear, simple. Just imagine yourself living on your land 500 years or 1,000 years ago, even, right? How would you be living?
In
You'd
my
be
territory,
surrounded by,
in the
right,
wild, in
like
nature.
literally think of it, yeah, you'd be
Yep.
surrounded by your people speaking your language, and you'd be calling it whatever you called it then, right? Because Canada and the United States and all the different states of it don't exist, right? Well,
Right.
that's all you've got to think of it right now. They still don't exist, right? You look at it, think of it from the standpoint of if you were there 1,000 years ago, how would you describe it? And if somebody asked you where do you live, what would you have told them? Or just tell them as if that's the case, because that is the case.
Absolutely.
Like that's literally what denies them jurisdiction, because that's how Meredith described the elk versus Wilkins on that movie that you saw there. He
Yes.
Mhm.
goes, the white man likes to use that on the Indian, because depending on how you answer, you're either going to keep or forfeit, lose your sovereignty. And he says, they ask you, where do you live? And he puts his hands in his air, in the air over his head, in the United States. And he says it like that. Ask an Indian, where does he live? In the United States. Like an imbecile.
Well,
Because
that's
if you're a sovereign signatory Indian, then you're living, like I said, imagine yourself there 1,000 years ago. Where do you live? On the territory of your tribe, right? Of your people.
I think this is so important. You bring that aspect. And one of the things I have up here was one of the copper, they call it the banishing ritual, but it was basically we're evicting you off our mother's lands and the tribe lands. And when I met with Bo and all the rest of the different signatory hereditaries, that each of these tribes had a different part of that treaty. And so I don't know if you can see here, but very closely, you can see that it's actually notched out there. And that's where we broke the treaties were broken with the monarchy or the colonists or the foreign agents and or any other referring agents, which means people that are working for them and taking their money. So, that type of thing. So it's a really important thing that I got to be part of this council. I got to authorize and hold all of these. And again, people want to go, where's this piece of paper? Some of this stuff goes back to 340 BC, or as Tim was alluding to, the camel's eye or different, the chematic things as well. Those go back to 408 AD. So well before, people started over here. So I think that's a really important point that you brought up, Tim. This is traceable, and the actual few judges and people in the know and absolutely definitely military industrial complexes are all very, very aware of this. But it's where I think we need to get together and bring the people. So if you haven't seen this is very Googleable. It's not like, we haven't done it or, it was done in secret, but that was done there in Ottawa, because as people talk about these different, places and Tim, we talked about that last week a little bit about what the Vatican is, what the inner city of London is, and that's where I sent all my documents to that were hand delivered to as well, and into Washington, D.C., but Ottawa's another one as well. And so do you want to elaborate a little bit on that? If you can, Tim or Miko, if you want to jump in here. I'll get Tim to put on your camera again, please.
Which part would you like? Well, I'll just start with the Vatican, which came to
Yeah.
mind. The Vatican was the original tribes, international world court for the tribes of the world. And Meredith says it was the white tribe took a section of its population and set them aside to make money for the Indians. Because I mentioned earlier how the white tribe and the red tribe were trading already for 1,000 years before Columbus ever discovered anything, right? And under that trade agreement, the white tribe owed the Indians money. The Vatican was set up to make money for the Indians for what they owed them under that trade agreement. So all the money of the Vatican, the richest corporation in the world, belongs to who? You have 3 guesses. And it's North American Indian klanmothers as the recipients of the holders of the treaty. But that's what the Vatican was in its original setup. And that's why all the money does belong to the American Indian. And what else, the other part that you wanted?
Well, I think that's a really important thing. And I'm going to go into a little bit about there was a trust fund that was set up between basically the crown, the queen, those representatives, and some of our hereditary relatives as well. So I'll go into that. But just up here, Aaron Capello and stuff like this has made some really amazing things because people always go, well, there's Canada States. I'm sorry, but that's fictitious. And there's a lot of politicians will tell you that those little dotted lines in banking de facto areas are unlawful too. And they're being disabled. But if you haven't seen this is what Tim was talking about, the language and the whole linguistics of the tribes. So this might put a whole new slant. People are like, what? I said, well, these are how you would actually determine, who's where. As we talked about the obelisks and things that they put there and wheels of peace and energy centers and stuff like that the First Nations, and I refer to it as the Star Nations, have done. One of the things I will bring back to a little bit about what Tim talked about with these original trust funds. And to me, this would be like before the original NESARA. If you have to be a nation, you better be a clan and a tribe to get some national economic security thing back. But it was talked actually a lot about in 2008, and I'm just putting these up there for people to do their own jumping and, research for. And up there was Winston Shroud, actually, and my partner in my natural health center, Galen Ray. And so these were done in Kelowna and in Saskatoon and other areas way back 20, 25 years ago that we were part of. But they actually taught about the real mapping system and what the Canada is defined by the Oceans Act and stuff like that. So if you haven't seen that, they're worth looking at versus the Great Law of Peace. Tim, you wanted to jump in here?
Just while it come to mind, on jurisdiction, territory of a tribe, how it's defined. Under international law, a tribe's territory goes by a linguistic concept. Wherever the dialect is spoken is how far your jurisdiction runs. So Meredith said him as a Dakota, his jurisdiction ran all the way down to Peru, I think he said, because Peruvian Indians speak a dialect of their language, the Dakota language. So your territory is wherever your language is spoken by your people, which if it makes perfect sense, right? Wherever all the people are speaking your language, well, that's your people's territory. And when you run into an area where it's now people speaking a different language, well, obviously that's their territory. Well, as of now, so that's a linguistic concept, as opposed to the civilized nations, Roman nations, because civil means Roman. Their countries are defined by lines on a map.
Absolutely.
Period.
Yeah, absolutely. This is one of the things I think a lot of people don't realize is that, again, those lines on the map don't really exist, not for a lot of us. And when you start looking at, what we're seeing here, this was actually an excellent depiction, and I suggest people go take a look at it. It actually came from Solutions in Commerce, and despite I think that being an oxymoron myself, but when you start going into that and you start seeing what's available and the proper definitions of what we're talking about versus signatory, I took these actually from the Solutions in Commerce video here that I did on my own Facebook, because I think it's really important. And this is why people can go back into this and take a look at this for a reference, because in here, what they're talking about, this is just to elaborate and to validate what you've already said, eagle.eye.man, is that the crown came over under the jurisdiction of basically Her Majesty. And how these definitions, people have no clue what Canada is. They have no clue that they're part of Masonic Illuminati, nefarious, basically cartels, mobs, mafia, call it whatever you want. They are the deep state. And when people do not realize where these actually stem from, and this will explain actually even how you had the 13 colonies, Upper and Lower Canada, and basically how the corporations were set up, and that the people thinking they're Canadians or working for them are actually subjects. In other words, slaves. You're subjected in servitude to Her Majesty versus the original peoples or original hereditaries, original Star Nations. So the minute they have contracted into a band of reserve or prisoner of war and conjoined with these corporations, they are no longer hereditaries or sovereigns. The most exciting thing to me was in here is when Burke, who was out of Ottawa, came in and started defining what this was. As you will start seeing, there's a very thin line around the outside of the continent, which is what they describe here. And as Tim was talking about, there is a trust fund they've been stealing and pilfering off of, and the interest off of it from day one. That there was a 60-40 split that has never been reissued or paid back, let alone as they were basically renters here. And a lot of the stuff people have got a total misconception of. And this is the kind of stuff that they're funding, even these nefarious bands and reserves for the natives and aboriginals, based off the original treaties and agreements with our ancestors. So if you actually take a look at it, it's quite mind-blowing to take a look at what's going up there. And again, Galen, on behalf of myself and not only just our center, what we're talking about, but on behalf of us talking to these different people to educate them. One of the things that also I just want to bring it to people's attention is there are a lot of people in these bands and reserves that come in with these supposedly coins. They were given to them as, this is to the Okanagan bang, by the way, as you guys think, British Columbia, but these are actually Masonic and Illuminati and conjoiner. These are not hereditaries. And this is why they were giving these coins, to basically get out of jail free, because they were allies and friends and partners with those corporations. So to make no mistake, there's a big difference between a hereditary, an original, and an aboriginal, as you said, with those languages.
Can I comment on that?
Absolutely, please.
Okay, a couple of things. Hereditary and corporate prisoner of war. You can't fulfill the position. You could be hereditary and be a prisoner of war, because you might be the hereditary,
right?
But it's where you pledge your allegiance. See, this is one of the things Meredith brings up as well. Everybody, when you're born, you come from a clan. It doesn't matter who you are. And when you reach the age of accountability, you are meant to be given the choice of where you pledge your allegiance, to the clan mothers of your tribe, your clan, or to the white man's rule of law, basically the Roman clan mothers. But nobody ever got that. They were denied that. And there was a second point there, and that some of the things you were saying there I wanted to cover as well, but I forget what it was now.
Well, I think this was a great place to end our part two. We've got a few minutes left. So, Chief Miko, if you'd like to say how you can, people can get a hold of you, any last comments, and then we'll leave it with Eagle Eye to finish up.
Yes, but I just want to say you did a wonderful job covering that, trying to break it down and explain it. It's a lot for people to take in, and I want to say this from the day you're born in the United States as a Native American. I'm going to term it the way they do. You're told a lot that you have to, as he just stated, wake up to and become accountable to who you're going to pledge your allegiance to. So much like law enforcement, I can't take an oath in the tribal law enforcement and I can't take oath in the colonial law enforcement and serve them both at the same time. You have to make that allegiance to where you're standing at. So if anybody has any questions over these topics, feel free to reach out to me at mikohehewuti at choctawturtletribe.org. And obviously back to Clan Mother Karen, who's very well versed in this, and she can get you through it, as well as Eagle Eye here. And I yield to him to give you his information.
I'd just like to say the second part was when you were, Karen, about Canada. Like, see, Canada, for all those that think Canada is a country, it's not. And if you go and look in the Highways, Oceans and Transportations Act, okay, it
Got
tells
30
you what
seconds. Go for
tells
it.
you what Canada has jurisdiction over, and it's just the water, the sea and the water. It doesn't have any land, so it can't be a country if it's got no land.
Absolutely. I want to thank you, and they can get a hold of you also because you're maintaining and looking after the writings of
Oh,
Meredith Quinn.
yes, Universal Law: The Writings of Meredith Quinn on Facebook.
Absolutely. So if you go there, and you can get a hold of me at Karenann Macdonald or Clan Mother 13.